All right, ready. So good evening and welcome to Master Gardener Training on 2/22 of 22. So it is the twos of twos. My wife was busy teaching on that today, and all the grade school teachers are enjoying this with their students. So it'll be an interesting day because it's a palindrome. The beginning numbers are the same as the ending numbers and the date. So that's what you get in a palindrome. So we're going to talk about pruning fruit trees, which is a really important topic that quite a few people don't fully understand. And this is just, as I tell you on some of these classes, this is blowing the dust off the top of the book. So this is going to get you started. This is not everything, but this is the condensed version down. There are whole classes taught on pruning at the collegiate level. And it's important because it does help the health of the tree as well as the production of the tree. And there's lots of erroneous information out there. So we want to try to dispel some of the erroneous behavior and the erroneous recommendations. So we will get started tonight. Okay, so our goals of fruit tree pruning is to obtain the maximum light exposure for the leaves and the fruit. So we need to have leaves go through photosynthesis, which is the powerhouse that provides food as it catches the sunlight and converts that into sugars. We need to provide a uniform distribution of all the fruiting wood, the producing wood, along scaffold branches. So if you think of a scaffold up against a building, that's what we're going to talk about, scaffolds. So there's structural branches that are productive, and we will show the ones that need to come out, if it makes sense. We also have the ability to control the size and the health of the tree, because we see many examples of fruit trees that have just simply been overgrown, and it takes several years to basically rehab them. You cannot do this on one Saturday afternoon. So please understand this is going to take a few years if it's never been touched. And then also reduce limb breakage. Limb breakage can make an opportunity for bacteria and pathogens to enter into the tree, which can lead to some diseases as well. So our goal for pruning fruit is to produce high quality fruit of the desired size. We have people will say, well, yeah, they never got very big this year. We'll talk about that. And by pruning and pruning out extra growth that is not productive, that allows more energy to go into the fruit that you want to have grow. And also by the product of thinning, where we take out certain fruit, because we talk about those questions as well. It's like, my tree was just so overloaded this year. Did you thin out any of your fruit? Well, no, I wanted it all to develop. And we don't want to get greedy, because the tree will only ripen a certain amount of that fruit. If it does not have the resources to do it all, to take care of it all, it'll drop that fruit anyway before it's ever mature. So it's better to reduce the fruit load, reduces limb breakage, and you get the fruit the size you want or more acceptable. That makes sense. Also, to increase the airflow in the tree, improves the production, as well as reduces the disease with blights and related problems where we don't have enough airflow. And then also a healthy root system by pruning at planting time if needed. Those are all very important pieces that we're going to have to remember. So we're going to talk about pruning at planting time. And when we go out and we buy plants, that we're going to see them in pots and we're going to see them in ball and burlap bags. And when you take these root systems apart, you are going to want to make sure that you take and look at those roots and do the pruning that you need, because that is an absolute a must. So that needs to happen. So very important. We also need to remove the girdling roots, the roots that will spin. And if allowed to, they can end up girdling or cutting off circulation and cause damage or death to the tree. We want to make sure that we enlarge the planting hole for larger roots to go into the soil without forcing them into the ground. Instead of trying to like pack the last pieces in your suitcase and jam the door or jam the lid shut, we want to open enough space up for us to plant and for big roots to lay and have an ability to go out and establish themselves. And prune out branches that with less than a 45-degree angle. And this is important. Some species are very prone to this, such as pears, that have a very sharp angle to them, because sharp branch angles that are not opened up like 45 degrees, they're more sharp and are more prone to storm damage. And if there is ice or snow load, they will snap easier. So it's good to have one. So you think about 90 degrees looks like this. 45-degree angles look like this. So anything that's really close to the tree trunk, that's something that we can choose to take out. And the critical pruning is done during the dormant season, best in March before bud break. And we could do it now, but look what happens out here. We have a very cold set of days here, and that's when we get hammered. So it's best to go more towards the March time and when things are a little bit more consistently warm. We're still going to have unpredictable weather during the late winter, early spring. So please remember that. It also reinvigorates the tree by removing any diseased and damaged dead wood. So the tree is not trying to sustain something that's damaged or sick. We clean that out and that rejuvenates that. So it helps. Also, cleaning out all those extra water sprouts. If we have excessive pruning, meaning we have someone that's going to go out on a Saturday afternoon and decide he's going to, or he or she is going to fix it all in one afternoon, like I warned you not to do, it's going to send up water sprouts and little growth that's not even productive. It actually saps the vitality of the tree. So do not be like my father and think he's going to get it done in one afternoon, because this is something that he would have done and did, and it caused that problem. And he's 85 and I can rat him out now. So there is some summer pruning that can be done. And this is more of a maintenance type work in June through August. This is when we take out those water sprouts, suckers, diseased or dead branches, or things we have breakage if there's a case of a storm. So we're going to clean all those out. That helps rejuvenate. It helps make sure that we have good vigorous growth over sickly growth or damaged growth on the tree.
What are the suckers?
We'll show you a dynamic, or we have a diagram that's pretty good. So suckers, that is an initiation of weak growth in very undesirable locations on the tree that will not help for good fruit production. It'll actually take away because the tree is trying to sustain it and it has no productive help. So then we have what we call unbranched whips. Whips are the little new trees that a lot of times you will get, and it looks like a whip out of a bag. You'll see those in the spring when you buy fruit trees. Those are called whips, and you prune those back so you get some initiation of secondary growth in the beginning of the scaffolds, and you prune those back to a healthy bud. And there's diagrams I'll show you about that here coming up. So we want to standard trees, in general, 44 inches tall, semi-dwarf, and the dwarf gets shorter and shorter. But you can control the height on trees, regardless the type, whether it's a standard, a semi-dwarf, or a dwarf, which is handy. And then pruning the branches at planting. So we can prune branches off for secondary growth to get it started. we can remove those branches that form that narrow angle under the 45 degrees. And if they were pruned once by whoever was the supplier, we're not going to prune again. So if you see new pruning cuts on a brand new whip or a brand new tree, that's enough for now. So we will plant the tree and then we will wait till the next year. So, okay, so we're going to talk about equipment, and I have some pictures coming up. But we have the scissors hand shears for the little ones. We have lopping shears that have the handles that we can lop with. We have a bow saw, which a lot of this will make sense. We want to make sure that we sanitize all our tools prior to use. And that is a way to reduce any bacterial growth, because as we prune or cut into the tree, into branches, we have an open wound, and we can introduce a pathogen that can cause a disease. And that's why we're very, very serious when it comes to fire blight. Fire blight is a problem in pears and apples, and also your crab apples, where the bacteria on the fire blight, the ends of the branches look like a burnt shepherd's crook. You think of the shepherd's crook and it has that curl to it, and they look like someone had a drip torch and torched the ends off, like they're fried. That's fire blight. And that happens out in western Nebraska when we have more than usual humidity. Now, we are drier humidity-wise than the other half of the state, but we will still get fire blight out here if the humidity and the airflow, remember we talked about airflow, is not optimal for what it normally is. Or we have an environment in our landscape where there's not a lot of airflow because we have a lot of trees in there, we have a lot of shade, we have a lot of privacy fences that cut off the natural airflow in the environment. So when we talk about 10% bleach solution, we talked about it in the class on growing seeds or starting seeds indoors. It is 1 part of bleach to 9 parts of water to make 10%. And you can mix that in a spray bottle, and you can spray it on the tools, and then you can wipe it off with clean rags. And then you let everything totally air dry out for you. So here's some pictures of our tools that we have. And this is from the NEB guide that I helped author with Von Hammond, who was the horticulture educator down at the Kimmel Research Center around Nebraska City. He has worked on a number of orchards over the years. You can literally click on this link and you'll go straight to the publication. It's in the set of handouts that everyone should have received from the website. So we will be referring to this one quite a bit. So we have the hand cut shears, then we have the loppers with the longer handles, and then the bow saw.
You might bring that beer in.
So there are 3 different examples of what we have. And so that works out really nice. You can see that. So we want to make sure that everyone is, that they see the pictures and understand what the tools are. So that's very important. And if any of you have your speakers on, please mute those. We are getting some feedback tonight, just a little bit. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next slide. The types of cuts, there are some different types of cuts that we can do, and getting it kind of set up time-wise. So a lot of it is training, and you're building the structural framework for the tree. So that's very important. And then the time frame by type. So the training, you're going to be training the first basically up to 8 years. Your smaller trees are going to be the first couple years, semi-dwarf for a little longer. And then your standard trees by year 8, they should be, in theory, set up and ready to go. But we'll always be doing some maintenance and cleaning out. So then we also talk about maintenance, and that is to maintain the size, to maintain the shape, clean up all those weird branch angles or the suckers or the water sprouts or crossing branches. And you can also do thinning, and where we're thinning out branches that are restricting the light and the airflow in the trees. And also in some cases, like a pear tree, or not a pear tree, a peach, you're going to take the central leader out and it's going to make a vase shape. So not all trees are maintained the same way. And so we'll show you some of those. And that was in that article from the University of Maryland on pruning peach trees, for example. So maintenance is removing of the suckers and the damaged and diseased branches. We do that every year. Thinning out, we remove shoots and branches back to the laterals and the scaffolds. So we're going to be doing this on a regular basis. This optimizes the airflow. This optimizes the light flow in through the tree, and that helps aid in production. The old saying was, there's an old wives' tale saying that you should be able to take the cap off your head and be able to throw through an apple tree and not hit a branch. And there's a lot of truth to that, in the sense that you want the airflow, you want the light penetration. If you throw your hat in a tree that's never been pruned, it's only going to get to the outer edges and hit and fall. So that's always a good test for us on that one. So then we have what we call modified leader, and that's keeping the scaffolds. And this will make sense once we see pictures, is that there is a scaffolding system, and the scaffolds are 6 to 10 inches apart vertically, and they have wide branch angles so they can hold up under fruit load. They can also hold up under lots of ice if we happen to have ice or a heavy snow load. So it's important. Then we have the low scaffolds, which are the ones that are 24 inches off the ground. We're going to keep those. The lowest scaffold, when you plant, needs to point southwest to shade the trunk from reducing the freeze crack. So when you plant a fruit tree, you need a nice low scaffold that always points to the southwest, because that southwest exposure in the winter, that's when we're going to break dormancy on one side of the tree. It's going to be really warm on one side and still kind of cold on the other. It breaks dormancy, and then we'll get a cold snap, and invariably we will start to see a crack form down the side of the tree because it broke dormancy. And then we had another cold snap, just like now, hit us. So that's one problem. The next thing is we need to keep one central leader. Should be twice as long as the longest lateral, and that is the case with the exception of peaches. After we'll prune the leader out of the peach eventually, not right away, but eventually. And pears, due to the nature of the pear structure on a pear tree, we keep competing leaders. So we leave a couple leaders in the center of it. So there are a couple exceptions to the rules that we want to share, and it'll make sense once we get hopefully to some pictures. Okay, here we go. This is what we call heading back. So you have your scaffolds and they're evenly spaced out. You have your central leader in the middle. It's on your left side of this diagram, and you're wanting to head it back so it kind of gives you some space. And because otherwise this new growth, look how it's growing in. It's very sharp angled, and it's going to be rubbing up against each other. So we want to prune that out. So everything is in the red here. It needs to come out. And then thinning out means we are going to take off things that are going to be on the side. Here's one that's not very productive at all. It might as well come out. This one is trying to compete with the leader. We want one nice solid leader. And so we're going to prune this one out. Does that make sense here? Any questions so far? On the two diagrams, the one on the right, we want that one central leader. So we don't want competition. So we're going to select this one in the red to cut out, and then the side branch will just take it out as well. So we have a central leader and we have 2 scaffolds on the side. These are for the young guys. These are for the young trees. And then over time, you will have on the left of this diagram, you'll have the central leader and 2 scaffolds, but you see the pieces in the red, see how the branches are going to be rubbing against each other? We don't want that. We want that pruned out. And when we prune back by heading back to the bud, next bud, that allows more growth to go further out. So we don't want it narrowed. We want it to go further out. So this, I always love teaching in pictures. It's a lot better to explain. So, and then the next one, here are some examples of pruning at planting. So on your very far to the left, you have a whip. This is what a whip looks like. This is something that you will see at the nursery or the farm store or the hardware store locally, and you can head that back. If it has been pruned before, you do not touch it, if that makes sense. Here's another heading back to get a desired height. And we got some problems here on this one, not far to the left, but next to one over. Look how the red branch is brushing up against the central leader. And look how the central leader has this other growth here at the top. We're going to head this back, and that makes for better desired height and better branch spreading. Then the one that's kind of in the middle that's got a lot of stuff that needs to come out. We're doing thinning cuts and heading back, both. So we're thinning and heading. So thinning out meaning we're taking these clear back towards the trunk. We're going to thin those guys out. There's too many scaffolds. Look at this one that's coming up at a very sharp angle. This is what we call a sharp angle. Here, halfway up the tree, there's 2 of them. They're sharper than 45 degrees, and they're brushing up against the other branches. So those are going to come out. Then you can head back the tips on these guys. You see how we prune those back. So I really like this publication in the sense that it shows you this is what we're keeping, this is what we're taking away. And then this one, clear on the far right, we want to initiate some scaffolds, and you're not going to initiate a scaffold when you have a whip that has one lateral off to the side. So you're going to have to head back and then initiate the fork going out. So does that make sense? Okay, good.
When you do those cuts, do you do them straight across or do you do them at an angle?
They're pruned at an angle, and I have a diagram on showing you how to prune that at an angle. So yes, very good question. You do not do flat cuts. You prune at an angle, and we will have that here in the presentation. So you're setting me up really good. So here's your picture of the trees. We talked about suckers. So okay, think about the tree. Here's the root system. Most of your roots are under that first foot of growth. You're not going to have a lot of deep taproot. You'll have some taproot, but you have a lot of roots that are running under the surface of the soil. You also want to prune so the graft on the tree is above the soil line. You do not bury the graft on a fruit tree. Big no-no. So you want to make sure that that root graft is up there. So you talk about suckers. These are the suckers that are coming up that come off the roots. These are not productive. They are stealing energy away from the root system, and we're going to take them out. We're going to prune them off. And some, like the crabapple, are very prone to setting up suckers. So it's something you just have to keep pruning away. Then you have the next one as the down sucker, which is closer to the stump or to the stump when it's cut down, but also the trunk of the tree. They'll go prune those out. The next one above that is called an improperly pruned stub. You want to go back into the collar a little bit, the branching collar, and you don't want to leave a large stub out on the side of the tree. You want to cut a little bit further back. You do not want to flush cut. A flush cut is literally right along the tree trunk. Big no-no. Don't do that. So the picture on your left going upwards is what we call a properly pruned stub, where you see a little bit of that. We're into that branch collar there. It's not a stub, it's sticking out, but it's not a flush cut. If you go over to the right side of the diagram, you'll see what we call a strong wide angled branch. This is that 45-degree angle that we're looking for. That's what we want. Then we have that what we call a heading height is the space between that low scaffold and the ground. That's the heading height. These are water sprouts. These are those guys that are coming up off of your scaffold that's pointing straight up. So it's got no angle, or it's a 90-degree angle at that point. Those come out. Those are bad. They need to come out. If we flip ourselves to the left side of the diagram, we have what we call a weak narrow branch angle, meaning it is narrower than 45 degrees. That is not desirable. So we wanted to show you what a wide branch angle is and one that is not. So if that makes sense. We also have a heading back cut here. You can see the little dotted line. That's where they're going to prune that out, because that growth is going to grow up and into the tree and run up against some of these other scaffolds. So we want to take it out. Here's another thinning out cut. You see the dotted line again, and another sharp angle. There's not enough space between your scaffolds for this one. It's also at a wide angle. You want to take it out. The next picture, if we go next piece across on the right side, is a spur. And that is a compressed twig. And on apricots, that is where the fruiting will happen, or on spurs. And it'll be further back in your publication. It'll show you that they're produced on the spurs. And then you'll see the terminals and the central leader. This publication is the Maryland publication, and you will find that there's the link for that. There's also the link for another Maryland article in your handout in the back in the references. So the next one is the third year dormant pruning. So this is later on in the life of the tree. You want to add 2 or 3 more scaffolds. You have the choice to keep 2 or 3 more. You want to make sure that they are evenly spaced out. And then there's enough space between scaffolds, like we talked about, so they're not all crowded together. We're going to promote 2 more again on year 4. So you can see this is something we're going to be doing every year. This isn't just plant in the ground and wish it good luck and walk away. There's an art to pruning. And remember, we're just blowing the dust off the top of the book cover. So our scaffold should never be longer than the central leader. The central leader is always the longest and the tallest, and your scaffold should never be longer than that. And on each scaffold, we should have 2 to 3 nice laterals that are evenly spaced out and open-angled. And you do not want the laterals to compete against your scaffolds. So remember, you don't want your scaffolds to compete against the central leader. And then you don't want your scaffolds on your leader you don't want your scaffolds or the laterals on your scaffold to compare against the scaffold. So there's kind of a hierarchy of length and width on that. So very important to remember. And this is what makes sense. Look at this picture on the very left side, this is the bird's eye view looking down into a tree, and this is where we would like to see the distribution of your scaffolds. Does that make sense? We don't get this unless we're on a bucket crane or something looking down into it. But this is what we're looking for. We're wanting even distribution. We want that symmetry in the tree. So as we train and we allow scaffolds to build, we want to make sure that they're evenly distributed. So here's another picture of a second year dormant pruning. So look, we have a scaffold that is competing with the leader here. We don't want that. Your central leader is here in the middle, and this scaffold is getting kind of long. So we're going to prune that back because we don't want it the same length. Oh, I need to get my cursor out. There is a trick adding a cursor. And I should have figured that out. I apologize. So on the middle picture, I better describe this for you. Middle picture, you see the red that's being pruned out. See how long that scaffold is competing against your leader. You want to head that back. That needs to be headed back. So remember, we don't want that competition. The leader is the longest, then the scaffolds, then the laterals. So they decrease in size as you go down from the leader to the scaffold to the lateral. And then third year dormant pruning, and I have a cherry tree that I could do this on, is we're going to do some cleaning out. So remember on this one on the far right, look at all the pieces that are coming out. We have some unproductive little branches here on the sides that we shouldn't be promoting, and that's being taken out in the red. We're heading back the scaffolds on the ends on the very right side of the tree in the red. Remember, we don't want our scaffolds to compete against the length of the leader, so we're going to head those back. And it's the same way on the left side of the tree where we have that headed back in places, because we want nice open branch angles, even on our laterals. We don't want the junk coming up that's going to crowd it and produce extra leaves, which produces less light penetration, which saps the vitality and uses more resources. And then on the leader, we're cleaning out the ends. We're heading them back on the very top of the tree. So we're going to clean those out as well. And if you have questions, please let me know. And we take a break, maybe I can figure out this cursor. Okay, so your fourth or fifth year dormant pruning. This is when you should have 6 scaffolds evenly spaced around the tree, around the trunk, and nice wide branch angles at 45 degrees is optimal. We want to prune to reduce the shading of the lower branches, because if the lower branches are shaded, you will not get very much fruit production out of them. Plus, it just saps more resources away from the tree. We want to prune back any aggressive laterals. That the laterals are going to try to get as long as the scaffold. Remember, we're going to prune those back. We're going to balance the canopy, the top and the bottom of the canopy, and promote new scaffolds to replace anything that breaks as needed. And then the leader can be pruned back as well to help for light penetration. So you can prune those back. So you can keep them pruned back all the time. What it's going to do, it's always going to start initiating some growth. It's always going to trigger some growth, but you're going to keep it from growing and getting out of control on you, if that makes sense. Okay, so the next one is pruning fruit-bearing trees. You want to keep the maintenance as we're going to clean out the suckers. We're going to, at the bottom, we're going to clean out the water sprouts that are coming up straight up that have no angle to them. We're going to prune out everything that's broken or damaged or diseased. We're going to prune out branches that are crossing and rubbing against each other. So we're going to make sure everything is taken care of here. We talk about removing the suckers and the water sprouts in the old diagram. Anything that's parallel or crossing, remove the limbs that are towards the center of the tree because they're not going to produce anyway. They're too close to the center of the tree. It shades the tree out, and remove excessive branching that reduces the light. And make sure that your equipment is sanitized, especially if we're going to clean out with fire blight. So here's a picture of a neglected tree. And I've got a laser pointer here. I just found out. So let's find it. Okay, so let's see if this works. See my laser pointer on here? Hey, there we go. Okay, so let's start with the obvious. See all these that are coming out here that are too narrow. They're up against the trunk. They are pointed inward. All of these are coming out. You want all this growth coming out off of these laterals, off these scaffolds. You also have some water sprouts that are not very productive here. You want to take those out because they're going to, the laterals on this scaffold here are pointing out. As long as they're pointing out, we're okay. It's when it's pointing in or if it's too narrow of an angle, that's when we've got a problem. So look at this one right here where my cursor is, my dot is. That's another one that's growing up. So remember, up and in gets pruned out. And then we can head back the terminals on this scaffold. Because remember, we don't want our scaffolds. This is one giant scaffold. And it's starting to get fairly long. And it's starting to compete with our central leader. So we're wanting to head back our scaffolds so they don't compete against the central leader. Does that make sense? So this is more heading back. And this is growing into the tree. It's not going to be productive. Prune those guys out. Here's a late scaffold. So they're going to take out anything that's growing upward and inward. And so taking that out. Does this make sense now? So you can see when we take all of this out, this is the third rule, meaning 33%. We don't want to take more than 33% out of the entire canopy in one pruning in the spring, because that will initiate a lot of suckers off the roots because the tree is saying, oh, we're getting cut back. So we're going to try to send up suckers. Get rid of those. And it also will promote water sprouts to develop. So take those out as well. So next, we're going to go to the neglected tree. And we have lots of neglected trees floating around. And this is where people were too worried to prune. And I understand you can prune and you can make bad mistakes pruning and you can cause a problem, but not doing anything is just as bad or worse. And neglected trees is you can't fix it all in one weekend. So don't follow what my dad did. You have to follow the third rule, a third out in the spring, in March. So, and we want to make sure that we remove any dead or diseased branches. Take those out. So here's a picture of a neglected tree, not too great right now. And I'm going to change my color so it's a little easier to hopefully see. So where my laser pointer is. Okay, see this guy? I don't think you can see this dot very well. Let's change back to the red. Okay. So you've got a lot of work to do and you're not going to fix it all in one shot. So let's thinking about heading it back and controlling the height This one is a weak, competitive lateral off of a scaffold. So we're going to take this out. We're going to head the central leader back because it's got a lot of junky, unproductive growth here. Look how it's competing, how these scaffolds are competing right up against it. We want to take that out as well. The only exception would be if it is a pear tree, because we keep competing leaders in a pear tree because they tend to die out, they tend to snap. And so you want to keep at least something going in the form of a leader, and you may have to go and use your spare sometime. So look how, as I'm moving my cursor, does it make sense? Anything that's growing upward and inward or crossing over needs to come out. And there's a third. You've done your third. It's not done. So you're going to be doing another third the next spring and after that.
Why do you take that tall middle one out rather than the branch that's curved from on your units?
Yes, there is, and I would probably take that out too. The question is right here, there is a curved leader here that's wonky. You could take this leader out, and what it does is it promotes this one to come up.
It'll straighten up.
That'll help promote it. So
Okay.
that's one way of heading back to take the height out of the tree. And that when you take this out, that promotes this leader to try to establish itself. I do not like this one either. Look at this one over where my cursor is running up and down. I do not like this one. Look at what a sharp angle that is. But can you fix it all in 1 year? No. So there's an example of lowering the height of a neglected tree. And that's 1/3 of the canopy when you take her all out. So we want to make sure the vertically grown shoots or broken branches come out, large branches, narrow branch angles like we showed in the picture, the narrow branch angles that are less than a 45-degree angle need to come out, and cut back those laterals that are starting to get out of control. We saw that in the picture. Here's another one. This is another example of some good cleaning out. You have a good central leader here, not a problem. Look at some of the others. Look at this that I'm moving up and down on my cursor. Look at that mess. It's growing straight up. It needs to come out. Absolutely. And we got some water sprouts here. We have some scaffolds that are there's not enough space between them anymore that you got to prune that out. This is up and in. This is up and in. Take that out. I do not care for this branch right here where my part of it's being headed back on the top. And look how this scaffold's pretty narrow. I don't care for that on this right side of the diagram. Its companion on the left is a much nicer, wider angle. That one's better. This one could definitely be improved, but you can only pick your battles so far when you're taking out a third and you've got a lot of work to do. Okay, we got a question. I'd like to remove a couple branches that are low to the apple tree, make it easier to mow around. Would there be anything to consider before I do that? And actually, this is a great time to talk about mulching under fruit trees. Fruit trees really need the mulch under the canopy because grass is a big competitor to fruit trees. And low scaffolds are fine to prune out, Patty, absolutely. But also, it's a good time to be planting a nice mulch layer no deeper than 3 inches under the canopy of the tree, because grass is such a competitor for nutrients, steals water, steals nutrients. If you are fertilizing your lawn, you have more than adequately fertilized your fruit trees. And you will see fertilizer for fruit trees and stakes and all different types of formulations. The problem with that is when you're pruning is going to initiate growth. You're going to prune stuff out, the tree's going to decide it's going to send more growth out. If you decide to prune and feed it, it's going to send out more weak growth that's not going to be tough. So beware of over fertilizing fruit trees. But I thank you for the question, because yes, there are branches that are way too low. They get shaded out. Those could come out. So we would like to, depending on the size of the tree, we would like to have 6 nice scaffolds. So remember to think about 6 scaffolds. So if you have the 6 scaffolds and you like what you have, that's great. If they're too low and they're too shaded out, they need to come out. But I also recommend highly on fruit trees that you mulch those, because you are allowing the grass to steal resources away that impede your ability to produce fruit. Okay, Carol had a question on pruning cuts, and this is where this comes in. Here's your pruning cuts. This is a publication from Texas A&M Extension. This is on general trees, on deciduous trees, but this is where we talk about the branch collar, and this is that line, the angled line in red. So you see my cursor dot? That's that red dot going along here. You can see where the tree branch is coming closer, whether this is a lateral coming off of a trunk, or whether this is a lateral coming off of a scaffold branch, or whether this is a scaffold coming off of a trunk, off the trunk. You can see where this starts to widen out. You want to prune here along this red dotted line. You never cut in this branch bark ridge. That is a big no-no. And you never flush cut. Flush cutting means you're going right up against the trunk of the tree and you're cutting down. So watch my cursor as it's going clear down. That's what we call a flush cut. That's a big no-no as well. The tree has the ability to compartmentalize the cut, and it'll start to coalesce over time. So here is on your right side an example where a dead branch was cut. You can see this is starting to coalesce a little bit prior to the bark ridge. So that's a good diagram for you to see. So think about that, as we don't cut into the bark ridge and we do not do a flush cut. We want to see that branch collar just a little bit, and you'll see it in the trees. You'll see it coming off of, your laterals coming off of your scaffold. You will also see the scaffold as it attaches to the trunk. This publication is also in your resources at the very end. And here is a picture of your angles of good, bad, and what we should do. We don't want to prune just off the top. The angle is too great. The angle is good, but the branch is too small. Sometimes it's too small, so we need a little bit bigger size branch. This is what is acceptable on the right side. So 45-degree angle. So pruning at a 45-degree angle, that's great. Okay, are we ready for a brain break? Okay, so we're going to go take a brain break for 10 minutes to go to the bathroom, refill our coffee, and I'm going to put the program on mute and we'll pause the recording. Okay, so we're going to resume our recording here, and then we're going to talk about thinning. And thinning is something that a number of people hate to do, because it's like, oh my gosh, I want everything to develop. I was like, oh, but you're not going to probably get everything to develop that sets on and establishes itself to a size where it's a harvestable fruit. So thinning is really important. We will have cases where branches are so loaded down, people are shoving boards up from the ground to keep them propped up. That causes a lot of structural damage to trees. And something that we talked about in the classroom here in person in North Platte. Fruit trees are soft woods. They are not a hardwood like an oak, and they damage very easy. So please, it's important to remember to thin out your fruit trees. And so these are some of the recommendations and why we reduce our fruit numbers down. So it increases the fruit size across the board. So what you do keep has the potential to be larger in harvestable size. So that's important. It reduces the excessive fruit drop. So the tree, depending on how many resources it has, depending on how much competition it has from the grass and other competition or brome is even worse. It just can't maintain everything. So it's going to start to drop fruit that it can't keep going. So it cannot sustain. So it'll drop the fruit before it will die. You know, the tree will take care of itself so it still functions, and it'll drop the extra fruits. So it's always important to do that. Reduce the weight and the strain on the branches, which we have talked about just a second ago, where we have such a strong fruit load. We'll see that on pears. We'll see that on apples. We'll see it on pears. We will also see it on your peaches. Really bad. Some years the conditions are just right. There's enough adequate moisture that they're just so loaded and they start breaking, and people say, well, my branches are starting to break. Well, there's a reason. We needed to do some thinning. So it's important. So for your apples are born on clusters, and there's usually 5 to 6 fruit on a cluster. We want to reduce those down to 2 on a cluster. 2 on a cluster allows for 2 nice sized apples to ripen and develop and be harvestable. When you do that, that also reduces the number that fall. So that's a good thing. So ideally should be one fruit per 6 inches of shoot, but just think of keeping 2 apples on the cluster and remove the rest. So it's good to, be thinking about that and maybe start the size like peaches. When the fruit starts to become the size of a marble, that's when you pluck them out. So the ideal on peaches is 1 fruit per 6 to 8 inches of shoot. And peaches are loaded full of moisture when they are ripe, and they become very heavy. And so we have a fruit tree, we have a peach tree at the end of our block, end of my block here in town, with all kinds of gangly outgrown stuff that's a mess. And they were trying to brace those poor branches up, and you want to knock on the door and say, hey, can I give you a hand? So, like, here, this will give you less headaches, more chance of the peaches. So that's important. So we talked about the apples down to 2 per cluster. And then mid-May, when the peaches develop, if they do not freeze, because they do have a tendency to do that, we want to probably keep a couple there and just let them develop nicely. And very important as well. Plums, they will take care of themselves. Plums they do not have to have as much work. They tend to be heavy. You can thin them out 2 to 3 every 2 to 3 inches in general. They will drop. They will be dropping them if there's too much. So remember, fruit every 2 to 3 inches. They can be very thick, especially if you think about the plums, the wild ones that grow along the ditches. They get very thick. They catch the moisture whenever there's runoff, and they just grow like crazy. But your tame or domesticated plums will have a heavy fruit load if you don't thin them out either. And plums tend to shatter and break kind of easy, as well as pears. Pears tend to shatter and break branches. Tart cherries, you don't have to worry about them. You're probably more worried about making sure you can get to the cherries before the birds get to them. So that's the running rule. And during the 2012 drought, we had people said, yeah, the cherry's about the size of the pinhead. Well, it was so dry. The tree was trying to sustain itself. It was still trying to produce fruit, and you had almost all pit and hardly any flesh around it because it was trying to sustain the tree and not die. So, okay, so you had a lot of itty bitty fruit. And once you pitted the cherries, there wasn't very much left in there. So that's a shame, but it happens. So the next one is branch spreading. So we talked about some examples of fruit trees that spread, and we want that 45-degree angle. And maybe your scaffold is not ideal, but it's not as wide as you want, but you can spread them. You can spread them out. You can train them to be spreaded by using ties and weights. And the older ones can be used by cables, but it's really important to catch them while they're early. So if you're going to choose a scaffold that has a narrower branch angle, it's best to get them trained early than trying to train them later. And so no more than 2 to 3 years, 2 years maximum, and then take the weight off or the cable off and let it go to its normal. And so here's a picture of an example of a weight and a spreader of a cable or a tie. This is actually in the NEP guide. This is a graphic that we borrowed with permission from the University of Wisconsin Extension. So there's 3 different systems here of spreading. So you can use a weight with that little bucket with the weight, and they tied it on, they're pulling it open. So we're looking at the 45-degree angles like we're wanting. So it's opening it up. The other one is putting a rod down by the trunk of the tree and then pulling that other one down on the left side of the diagram. And then you have another type of wrap that is pulling the one on the upper right side down and getting it away from the central leader. So your central leader takes kind of a dog leg and comes up, and then this other scaffold, you're wanting to open it up so it's not close to it. And so do not use baling wire. Do not use a garden hose. Please use the cable or the fabric ties that are for fruit trees. Some people have used tie straps that are flat. And the reason why is we do not want the material that is opening up these branches to rub off the cambium layer, the xylem and the phloem tissue right under that conducts water and nutrients, because that damage is permanent. So there's 3 different ways to spread branches right there. Does anyone have any questions on that?
What was the last one there where that stick is? On the right-hand side?
On the right-hand side, you have the brace that's up against the trunk.
So they're lifting it?
Nope, they're pulling it down.
That's a tie strap. It's pulled, but you tie it around it.
Oh, that's a tie strap?
Yeah.
So we got our clicker here. This one, is this what you're talking about? I'll get my laser pointer. This one?
No, the other one.
This one, yeah. This is using a tie strap. So you can tie strap it this way. And you're pulling it away, so you're widening this angle. This is the angle that we're trying to do. And it's staying away from competition with the leader. So in an ideal world, and remember, trees are not textbooks. So in an ideal world, there's going to be some variation, but this does help. So, and also does this laser pointer on Zoom. So I'm glad I learned something tonight. So here's some special considerations for different crops. And so this is where we talked about some of those exceptions to the rule. So I'm going to show you some of those. Apricots live on those short-lived spurs. And I'm going to go clear back into my slide set to show you an example of what a spur looks like. in our diagram from the University of Maryland Extension. This is a spur. So those spurs are going to produce the fruit for the apricots. What's really important with apricots is you have to plant them in a somewhat protected area that does not warm up fast. Because if we are on a south-facing slope or a south-facing exposure where it's going to get warm, that apricot is going to send out blooms early. And you know what happens out in Nebraska? We're going to get with a cold snap. And so you're going to have a tree that may bloom and will hardly ever get produce off of it. So it's really important to go back and plant that tree in an area that is somewhat protected, that's not going to warm up and break dormancy really early. So this is where protection in it, you have a shelter belt and you have it on the protected side of the shelter belt, for instance, or around buildings that don't radiate lots of heat. So, or don't plant it on a southern slope. Those are all things to think about when doing apricots, because we don't want them to initiate early blooms that are going to get hit with the frost. And so cutting back those branches every year and thinning out to make sure we have lots of light exposure is very important on apricots. Okay, so we got a question. On an apricot tree, if you needed to trim the leaders, should you do that in March or wait until last frost? You do that in March prior to bud break. And bud break is going to vary each and every year. So you got to watch the stages of development on your flowering on your apricot, which is a little different than pruning a lilac, because remember the rule is you always wait in that window after the lilac blooms, then you prune it. Well, with the fruit trees, you prune it before that bud splits open. So, but I'm glad that you're asking about pruning after blooming, because in a lot of things, a lot of our shrubs or ornamental shrubs, that is correct. On our fruiting trees, we want to prune before bud break.
If you see a vertical crack on the south side of the tree, then is that tree likely to die?
The question is, if you see a vertical crack on a tree, a frost crack on a tree, will it die? It depends on how severe it is. I have one on my sugar maple in my front yard that did the same thing. Maples are soft wooded trees, especially sugar maple, and it was on the southwest exposure. Remember, we talked about planting with a scaffold going off to the southwest angle. So we have a branch to protect that southwest exposure. And that's exactly what happened. So I am just taking care of it the best I can. Will it shorten the life of the tree? Very well could. It's very well could. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the pears. The pears tend to produce very narrow branch angles, less than 45 degrees. And we talked about that. The pears are very prone to very sharp branch angles, which can be very detrimental to when we have a heavy fruit load or snow load or wind damage. They tend to snap easy. So we prune back scaffolds to an outward lateral. So we got to clean up, do a lot of cleaning every year and thinning out. So we have good, strong, wider scaffolds, and we clean out all the stuff that's weak and sharp angled as much as we can. If you prune more than your 33%, it'll definitely send water sprouts up your laterals or up your scaffolds. It'll send these dumb looking straight up and down water sprouts. So if you prune too severely or prune too much, even following the third rule, you may accidentally prune too much, and it happens. Prune those water sprouts out. Pears are very prone to fire blight, which we talked about, the terminals that look like someone took a drip torch to the end, and the end is curled like a shepherd's hook, like this. So what we do is when that happens, we're going to measure the damaged area. And we're going to measure into 5 inches at least into healthy tissue to the next bud. And then we are going to take a sterilized pruner and we're going to cut that out. And we're going to sterilize and dry our pruner after each and every cut, because the fire blight transfers easily on pruning shears and loppers and saws. So very important.
Did you say 5 inches?
5 inches into healthy tissue. So you go from where it's burnt and crispy, you're going to go another 5 inches inward at least to where the next the bud is, where it looks like it's healthy tissue, and that's where the cut's going to be. And remember, we're not going to cut into the branch collar where it branches out. We're going to follow that 45-degree cut rule and make sure that we don't cut into that branch ridge. We promote multiple leaders on pear trees because we have fire blight tendency. We have to cut them out. So we got to keep something to promote to come back and replace it. So that's important on pears. Peaches, they set their fruit on the 1-year wood. The 1-year wood is that bright, pretty red wood. And so that's what it is going to do. You're going to cut above the bud in that next area. So you're going to cut above the bud, so that'll promote some new growth. The question was, do you cut below or above the bud when you have to go in and do that cut for fire blight? What will help is if you do your maintenance pruning and you're thinning out every year where there's good air circulation. That will help it. And we may get some higher than normal humidity levels out here, and we do get fire blight occasionally in the western half of the state. But since we are higher up in altitude, we have nice, strong western Nebraska winds. That helps kind of fix some of that a little bit. So it's not as prevalent as on the eastern half of the state, where it's more humid, lower elevation, and maybe not as strong a wind. So we're wanting to prune in mid-March to mid-April, and we promote a vase. The form of the tree will be a vase, and it promotes the light penetration by removing the central leader. This is the one that really surprises people and will definitely make people concerned, like, you mean we're cutting out what? So this is a picture from that University of Maryland article that was on the handouts. And so diagram A on the far left, diagram of 1-year-old peach tree that has produced too many limbs and to be left permanently. So that's an example. We've got too many limbs. It's sent out a lot of soft growth. B is the same tree that you have kept after pruning. So it has 3 scaffolds and the leader is cut out. And if you look at C, that's the bird's eye view down into the tree. See how it's symmetrical? That's what you're wanting. You're wanting that symmetrical. So, and your new growth will be the red. It'll be red in color, and that's what's going to produce your fruit every year. So peaches are going to take a little bit more love, and it's going to be different. We're going to promote that vase shape.
So from A to B, they cut down the central leader.
The central leader is gone in this picture from A to B. The center is the central leader, meaning the trunk going straight up. We've taken that out already. It has too many scaffolds. So A has too many scaffolds.
Right.
And B, we're going down to 3.
Well, how do you know
And
which scaffold you want?
3 is good. 3 is good on the first year.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so this is the first year example. 3 is good. You don't want 6 on the first year. You want 6 at the end after about 4 or 5 years. So 2 to 3 is what you want to keep that first year. And so if we have the bird's eye view looking straight down in there, we have 3 fairly equally distanced branches, scaffolds. So that's ideal. Plums, once again, we want even scaffolding, 2 per year basically. The scaffolds tend to be very compact, more compact than other fruits, and they will produce extra water sprouts that are going to come straight off the scaffolds and the suckers. So in review, we're going to go back. Please do not get seasick on me. We're going to go back to our picture of a sucker and a water sprout. Okay, water sprouts are these. See this? These are water sprouts. Plums tend to do this really bad. Send up water sprouts off of the scaffold and sending these suckers up and off the base of the trunk or out of the roots. So you're going to be pruning these out on a regular basis and keeping those cleaned up.
I just noticed something. There's a down sucker and a root sucker.
Down suckers can be at the base of the trunk or right under the soil line. And then you're going to have root suckers that may come up out of the grass in the lawn or in your mulch layer. So
Down on a ash tree.
okay. Yes, and some tree species, whether they're fruiting or they're deciduous, tend to sucker anyway. So, or that is a sign of distress. And so they're not, they're trying to send a replacement. Okay, so we got some questions on chat. So we want to answer those. So the first question is, if you have a 2-year-old peach tree that has never been pruned, would you start with the leader or the scaffolds? I would start with the scaffolds first, and then the next would go to the leader. So choose your good scaffolds. Remember, no more than 3. And then the next year, take out the leader. Okay, the next one on peach trees, where do the scaffolds come in from year 2 and 3 if you have pruned out the leader? If you pruned out the leader, it's not going to come back. So you're not going to worry. You may get down what we call down scaffolds that are further down on the tree. And if you want down scaffolds to keep developing, they're not going to be very productive. So that's one tree that you can really shorten really quick is by taking that central leader out. But in the case with Nico's question is, when you haven't done anything, it's best to make sure you choose your nice scaffolds first and then take the leader out the next season. So, because by the time you clean that up, you're going to hit your 1/3 rule very easy. Okay. Okay. Kathy, just at the surface or under to cut off the sucker? Cut off at the surface. If you can get down, you could, but you can just cut it off at the surface. And some of them will be a constant headache. I will warn you of that. Crab apples have a really bad tendency to do this. So just giving you a fair warning. There is a product called Sucker Stop. You can try it, but it doesn't replace just good old-fashioned hand pruning. Kind of an expensive cop-out. But you spend the money and it still doesn't probably work for you. So I'm just warning you now. Okay, tart cherries. They produce long live spurs. So those little spurs that set for your apricots, you will get spurs for tart cherries. You can use spreaders to open up their branch angles and they do respond to them. The earlier you do that in the tree's life, the better off. And it's really important to remove downward branches or damaged branches. We always can remove damaged branches throughout the year. Damaged branches can come out, diseased branches can come out, and dead ones can come out any year, any time of the year. That's fine. Take those out. We can remove branches growing across the canopy. So they tend to do this crossing, rubbing, literally where they'll rub the bark off the cambium layer if you allow it to. So want to clean those out. The water sprouts that come straight up off the scaffolds and go straight up into the tree canopy, those come out. And then your thinning cuts will help improve the light penetration and the movement. So you can do your thinning cuts of clearing all the junk out, will really help the light improvement penetration in, and will help your fruit production. So there is an art to this work. And remember, this is just a very thin overview. And so if anyone has a wild hair and wants to come to my yard at 2211 Birchwood Road in North Platte, I think I have my tart cherry out in my front yard. We can do a YouTube video of it and post it on Facebook for us and show you this is what's going on. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. And we're going to do it at a time when my wife is not around because she gets scared when I pull out the pruners. So we'll show an example of some good, bad, and ugly. So there's that. Here's the references of publications that I used. You can go to any one of these publications and click on them and you can see it. Okay, got a question. During the year, if water sprouts grow during the summer, should you wait until next March to prune them? Just prune them out. Prune them out. Don't go too far into the summer. You can prune them out in the spring. And if you got some early summer stuff, you can prune them out. Don't go beyond August, because that will initiate really weak growth in the fall, and you don't want that. So remember, we talked about that's a June, July kind of thing. Okay, and then my contact information. And if you want to call the office and I'm not there, we have a phone system that it now goes to voicemail, and the voicemail message gets transferred to my cell phone, which is really nice. So that's a nice perk to have tonight for that. So mulberries pretty much take care of themselves. It's kind of amazing. You can clean them out as well. Just do some maintenance pruning on them. Mulberries do produce a lot of nice fruit. You want to make sure you get them before the birds do, or the birds leave presents on your car or your truck. So that's important. You can thin those out as well. So I'm going to stop my share, and then I'm going to go to some of my webpage resources, and I'm going to share those with you. If that would be okay with everyone, we're going to share those.
Would you bring the address for the web page that had the list of
Everything.
print offs and everything?
Okay, so this, I'm going to show you how to get to it. I'm going to put it in the chat, but this is the Extension Office website, is LLM for Lincoln Logan McPherson .edu.unl.edu. I'm going to get out of and jump out of. Jump out of my presentation altogether. Okay, so we're going to go to lincolnloganmcpherson.edu.unl.edu. So it's up here in the blue. Do you see that here? Blue highlight. So that's what we're going to, that's where we're going to start. This is the master page for the Lincoln Logan McPherson County Extension Office in North Platte. And then we're going to go down to this box called Educational Programs. And then we're going to scroll down till we see Master Gardener. And then we're going to click on Master Gardener. And this is where Vicki and I are populating the recordings and the handouts and the materials for each class. So if you wanted ornamental grasses and sedges from Bob Hendrickson, that is his YouTube recording and his handouts. This is my class from Starting Seed up here. For all the stuff that we talked about from Starting Seed and the YouTube. So we're working on it. We're adding all the pieces back in. I will also put the quizzes up here too. So, and then I'm also going to put the Zoom link. So you'll have the Zoom link each time. And then the password is lot. We're going to take the password off so not anyone can come in and totally crash our website. So from here on out, remember, my password is my last name. But I will put the Zoom link on from here on out, so you'll have that. Okay, so. No, the email is not in my signature. So, I believe it is. It's llm.unl.edu that's the one on my signature line. And then this is the direct link for all of this that we're showing right now. So that shows that too. Okay, so the pruning fruit trees, that's what we just got through. That's what we talked about in our slide deck. The next one is the fruit tree cultivars for Nebraska. And so this is print. This is a publication that was updated by Paul Reed, who is a professor in the department. And it talks about the plant hardiness zones for different parts of the state and cultivars of fruit trees that match. So Paul has done quite a bit of homework for you to take the guesswork out for you, depending on where you live in the state. So there are horticulture regions that he's built up. So the far west 12, that's going to be your panhandle. Then you have the region of counties in north central Nebraska. And then there's another region for south central and southwest. And then a section for northeast Nebraska and a section for southeast. And so we're just going to scroll down here. There's a lot of reading for you to get to do. Talks about pollinator requirements on some species and some cultivars, and then the specific conditions, because we have lots of chaos. So it's important to remember the types of apples. So here's apples. It'll have the cultivar, it'll have the zone. We're all 4 to 5 zone. Do not go for zone 6 because it's too warm. A through D are regions. A starting out in the west. And then it'll talk about what we call the pollen source cultivars. So there are, for Lodi, there's going to be specific trees that you will want to plant in combination for a pollinator source. So it gives you a good description. It's an early blooming, early summer apple, clear yellow with a crisp flesh and fair quality. Fruit has a short shelf life, especially for pies. Requires several pickings. So there's some good brief descriptions on here to help you decide what you really care to work with. So it's got those in here. So, you know, we're thinking of areas that are going to be pretty, southern Nebraska is easier in that sense because we are below that hardiness line. If you notice that, go back to our diagram. So we have that line here, that plant hardiness zone. So that's going to be a factor. So A, B, C, D, E. So And you'll read the publication, it'll show you there.
Are we C?
Yeah, see, that's where we get into, Paul did not mark those in here. He showed it, here's where it says horticulture regions. The horticulture regions, A through E, are shown in figure 1, are further subdivisions of the plant hardiness zones, are more specific to Nebraska's growing conditions. They take into consideration other plant growth factors such as frost occurrence, seasonal rainfall and wind desiccation, humidity, soil duration, and intensity. So E is actually out in the panhandle. So
Where?
E is the panhandle. I'm sorry.
It is.
I flipped it around. I'm sorry. David's mistake. David's mistake. So E is here. So D, C.
Wait,
So we're going to go backwards.
that's,
B, so A is here, southeast Nebraska. B is northeast. C, D, E. And you will read this, if you read the full publication, it will show you some information on here. Woody fruit trees that are adapted to very cold regions, very cold winters of Canada and New England will often not survive the cold, semi-arid winters of Nebraska. The apparent lack of hardiness is mainly result of desiccation, which is winter drying, which is caused by high wind velocity and low humidity. Imagine that, we're facing that right now, associated with the cold. A good example is the Jonathan apple, which is adapted to zone hardiness 4 and 5, but not horticulture region E because of high elevation, lack of rainfall, and potential desiccation. So E is the panhandle. E is the very west end, the 12 counties out in panhandle. So even though you will see catalogs that will say this is good for zone 4 and 5, you also have to consider this map too. So it's another layer. It also talks about the pollination requirements in here because some really do need that pollinator, and it's good to pair the trees together with the good pollinator. So that's why Paul has done this, has shown you the codes of which apples, for instance, are best together with each other as pollinators. So you can cross-reference. And then the type of cooking and the type of shelf life, some are not very long shelf-lived. So it talks about apricots are hardy to zone 5. Well, there's a big chunk in Nebraska that's not zone 5, is it? And even then we get very early blooming. That's why we want to keep it away from areas when we plant apricots that are not going to induce early blooming, because they're killed by late spring frosts. So it only has a few cultivars that are recommended, such as Sun Gold, Moon Gold, Moore Park, Gold Cotton, Harglow. They are not self-fruitful, so a second cultivar must be used as a pollinizer. Gold Cotton, Harglow are self-fruiting. So got a question. If a local greenhouse or store has fruit trees, can assume they'll be zoned for here? And the answer is no. Do your homework. Don't assume. Do your homework so you don't get disappointed. I hate to say that, but it gets us every time. Because a lot of your box stores, which are your retail centers and your farm stores, they bring in stuff that has no reason to be out here. But they're thinking of sales. Your local nurseries have done a much better job of researching it because they know the conditions. So that's one of the tricks. Oh, I asked the local, and they only have trees for our area. And that's good. If they're using a local greenhouse, that's correct. That they have done the research, Viola, that they've done the research for our area. That is correct. Sorry, I was thinking of the farm stores such as Tractor Supply, Menards, Orchlands, they bring in stuff that has no place here, sadly. Think about all those sad blueberries that are going to die a horrible death here in Nebraska because people don't do the soil conditioning,
Our soil.
and our soils are just rotten. You can do container blueberries, so I got that caveat. If you do container blueberries and you're bringing in soil, not native soil, and you're bringing in peat moss and you're doing all that work. So you have to do your homework before you do that. So then we have our tart cherries. These would be called pie cherries. A lot of our pie cherries are going to be self-fruiting. A number of the sweet cherries are going to be as well. We have, in general, less success with sweet cherries versus a pie cherry. Our tart cherries do better overall and survive the long term better than sweet cherries. Then we have nectarines. They're susceptible, not very winter hardy. So if they're planted in an area where it's protected, so on the inside of a windbreak would be nice. But that winter wind, that northwest winter wind, is just as devastating or worse than our summer winds from the south. And then we have the peaches. They have to be very protected sites like we talked about, just like the apricots and the nectarines. And where you have a good microclimate. So you can have an acreage and have a microclimate, and that will help you. Then we go to our pears. And pears and apples are in the same family. They're in the rose family. So a lot of our basic things are very comparable between apples and pears. Remember, we're going to keep multiple leaders available for the pear because they may get fire blight and you have to do the pruning back. So you may have to promote a competing leader to do the job. Then we have Asian pears. There are some Asian pears. We have people that love Asian pears. They're different than Bartlett. So we see more people bring in Asian pears into cuisine. And so here are some that have some success in Nebraska. So definitely give it a shot. And then our plums, these are the domesticated plums. They are not the wild plums out in the ditches. You bring wild plums in and they tend to infect our domesticated plums. So that's one thing to also think about. So that will be nice. So the superior is American-Japanese cross. That goes through all that goes clear out to the panhandle. So that's nice. The South Dakota plum also is good because it goes through A through D, clear through north central Nebraska in that map. So here's some resources that you can look through and their websites that you might want to check with. And this is Paul's work, and Paul has worked with fruit for a long time at the university. So there's one resource I wanted to show you is the fruit tree publication. Oops, I'm going to go back. The next one is one that I use quite a bit. People ask about spraying fruit trees. There is no one magic bullet that's going to clear and fix every problem in the fruit tree world. So please do not expect that. And this publication helps sort this out. So I'm just giving you a show of this. It is broke out by sections depending on the type of the crop. So here for apples and pears, the schedule, and it's done by the development stage. It's not done by a calendar. Setting things by a calendar is not a good idea out here because we have so much variation in our climate and our weather within a year. So always look to the development stage on the tree and where it's at and what can be done when. So, okay, so this is before bud swell. And it shows you that it might have mite scale or it could have fire blight. And then it talks about what product could be used. Dormant oil does not have a brand name. A lot of it's just dormant oil. And it tells you the comments. So it smothers overwintering eggs of scales and mites and apply when the temperature is above 40 degrees. And European red mite infestation are high. Bright red eggs may be seen on small branches and twigs. It just gives you some good clues. And the reason why we can use this Missouri publication is it shows you the development stage. So that's how we can interpret that development stage to what's going on with the development of the fruit trees where we're at, okay? So then we go down and it shows us as the fruit is developing. That's why I sent out that Cornell publication on what those stages look like the week before or 2 weeks before. So you can see the pictures better for that. Okay, so on this one, so I'm going to just go to the next topic here. The green tip to half-inch green, when the leaves are just starting to break out. And it'll have the product, and then it'll have the product, and it's not going to be trade name. It is going to be active ingredient name. So that's why we need to look at the active ingredient to use. If that makes sense. Because there's a lot of different products under a lot of different company names, but you got to find the active ingredient to do its job. So that's what's really important about this. So I'll show you that. Some of these things are going to be obvious. Malathion. A lot of people hear about malathion. You can go out and buy malathion. But, you know, other products such as permethrin, there's a lot of different types of permethrin out there. So it has to be something that works on fruit crops. And like on this, it says for pear pest only. So, and it gives you some specific instructions. So this is just a taste. It's for you to sit down and read because it's really important. Because we will have people that will buy things and buy the wrong thing. We'll show them what to buy and then they have to return it. So before you go out and buy, tell people, let's look at this publication and find out what you need. And sometimes the local stores won't have it. So then you will need to make sure that you may have to buy it online and have it ordered in. Or maybe the local store can order it in. So you can always ask that too. So apples and pears, it'll go through the stages of bloom and what pests are going on at different stages. And it'll go clear to summer cover sprays. And then it'll go to gooseberries and currants. There's really not a lot that you have to do for gooseberries. Tough rascals. Currants are the same way. Then you get into the pears, nectarines, plums, and apricots. These are called stone fruits. And it's the same type of situation. So look at the picture and look at what potentially could be the problem. And always remember, we need to identify the problem correctly before we do any treatment on it. So this would be some good extra reading. Good extra reading. It's a great resource to keep up. The University of Missouri updates its publications, so it's a good one.
I think that fruit trees are a lot of work.
Fruit trees are a lot of work. They are a lot of work. We have a lot of people excited about them. We want to help them have success and not overwhelm. That's why orchards take a lot of work.
What is the in the guide where it says pest or disease? What's the
Looking back at the legend here. There's a legend here that has the key. The key means not all insects or diseases listed in the plant's development stage or spray period will be present in your fruit plantings. Just because it could be there during that time does not mean it will be there. Does that make sense? So these are the possibilities of what could be going on, but it may not be there. So if you don't see it, that's a good thing. So does that make sense? If you don't see it, don't worry about it. So that's where your key is. Tells us this is the possibility. You could have coddling moth by chance, but you may not. That's why correct identification is so important. And correct identification is one of the first tools that we have in integrated pest management strategies, meaning we're going to identify exactly what it is and we're going to treat it correctly. Okay, so then we got pears, nectarines, plums, apricots, and there's quite a bit here. And then it's going to go to cherries. And so they will have the stages for the cherries. It doesn't have pictures, but it'll say apply when 25% of the blooms are open. And then the next one is apply when most of the bloom petals have fallen. So that tells us the stage. So this is a good publication to have in your arsenal. Then we go into strawberries. Go down, raspberries, blackberries. Those are what we call cane fruit or brambles.
Earlier, in one of the earlier classes, you talked about strawberries and something about lifting them up.
They can heave. The question is about strawberries and somehow lifting them up. Strawberries can actually heave up out of the ground. The plants will heave up. And so that's a different set of management strategies. So, and then you also do you cut off the daughters. And in a big strawberry patch, you spread them out and plant the rows wide enough that you can run a trim lawnmower through and cut them off. So, which also really freaks people out. So that hopefully will be covered in Grow Big Red class coming up on strawberries. Sarah Browning, I believe, will be talking about that. We also have the material for grapes. So if you are growing backyard grapes. So these are all the recommendations on potential pest problems in grapes. And Paul Reed will be teaching the class on the grapes. Blueberries, if we can keep a blueberry alive, we're lucky. And that's in a container out in western Nebraska for sure. But it's interesting to read the information. And then what's really nice here are the dilution rates. So it tells you how much product you need per rate. And so this breaks this down for you. It's really important, whether you're using a powdered form or a liquid form, and then your conversion tables. So, and remember, we only apply what is recommended on the label. We do not go over. We can cut a rate and be fine. But as master gardeners, we cannot over recommend what's over the rate on the label. So that is a quick run through that publication. And then the last one, well, I've got the Pruning Fruit Trees. This is the publication that a lot of the presentation was taken out of, is the original Pruning Fruit Trees publication that was posted on the website as well. I'm one of the authors on it. So it's there. Vaughn's name is there. He was an orchardist at Kimmel. Connie Fisk was with Nebraska Extension and has since moved to a position with Cornell University Extension and now is working for the Washington Department of Agriculture. So Connie is very knowledgeable on fruit crops as well. So we're going to go to look at the last one, and this is the article from University of Maryland on pruning and training peach and fruit trees. And this is one that just was published last year. And so it's good to do some reading, take some reading, and read on your own. So you notice this picture is up here from the presentation. So that information was there. So I just wanted to share a lot of this information with you. It's quite a bit to absorb. So remember, we're going to be loading all of this information up on our website. So if all else fails, always go to this website to find it. I will send it out on an email to just go to the website, and hopefully my emails will not crash anymore with people and help people out. So that is that information. If you want to look up previous classes, the information's up there. We're not going to cover the quizzes. It's almost 8:45, but we'll cover the quizzes later. I'll also write the quizzes for the ornamental grasses and sedges. And we'll go over starting plants from seed. And then I'll do a quiz for Justin's nut tree class. So I'll send out a couple quizzes for you to work on and do. I apologize. My schedule personally was totally messed up with my dad's cancer reoccurring. So that was a problem. His port has been installed and he starts chemotherapy next week. And so we will have to just kind of keep everything, keep things as flexible as possible. That does not change the Master Gardener schedule. The class schedule will always remain the same. The handouts may move a little slowly getting uploaded depending on my time to get it prepped. So always check the website for me. That will be important. We have a question. What was the 1 hour class you were talking about at the start of class?
The Thursday night fruit one.
The Thursday night fruit class. Yes, absolutely. So here's the easy way to figure that out. Go to my Facebook page, which is called Nebraska Gardener, and like my page. And I'm going to show you, here is the link to go to the Grow Big Red virtual classes. Go to the Nebraska Gardener Facebook page. The link, yeah, right there. So click on it. And it'll open it up. And it shows you the full schedule. It's here on, it's 6:30 Central Time, 5:30 Mountain. It'll be an hour-long class. It'll be on Thursdays. So please, if you want to get some more hours in for Master Gardener, these are great classes. They're taught by a range of us in the horticulture group across the state. And so you can register for free. When you click on that link, you'll go down here and you'll see how you register, and you will get the invite for every class. So you need to register for classes, and then you'll get the link and then the invite for that. I will also put it on an email out to everyone again, but remember, these are 6:30 Central, 5:30 Mountain. So really important. So our focus will be on fruit trees, going about pruning basics, dormant season pest management from our entomologists, on selecting and buying fruit stock. So talking about choosing things that work in our environment. Soil and fertility, I will be teaching that section, for instance, will be co-teaching it. Site selection and design, edible landscapes. Brambles will be blackberries, raspberries, currants, gooseberries, that group. Grapes, palm fruit, which would be your apples and your pears. Stone fruit, which would be apricots, nectarines, peaches, plums. Strawberries will be March 31st, and unusual fruit. So that kind of gets into the aronia berry and some dewberries and different crops. So yes, that is what that is about. And a wonderful opportunity for you to learn all kinds of good stuff. And I would definitely count that as education hours for Master Gardener. So take up on that, and also follow my my page for Facebook called Nebraska Gardener, because that also will have lots of good stuff as well. So, are there any questions for tonight? Because we're almost to 9 o'clock, and I figured everyone's brain is full. Any questions in the room? Any questions out in cyberspace on Zoom? If not, we will reconvene again. We will reconvene next Tuesday. I will be home, so my schedule will be a little bit more lax, getting materials ready for next classes next week, and I will start sharing this stuff. So thank you for being patient with me as I work with my dad and his treatments as we go forward. So be lots going on and be more great information to share and teach. So thank you all, and have a wonderful night. Goodbye.